This is summary reflection number 2 for Foundations, Histories, and Theories of Counseling with Naja Dhruva. I am Sarah Kuipo-Mishina-Coons, and today I'm going to talk to you about somatic therapy. Now, to put it very simply, somatic therapy is based on the idea that healing happens in the body and that pain and trauma are also stored in our body. Now, right off the bat, you might relate to this as in like, oh yeah, when I'm nervous, I get a stomach ache. But it goes even deeper. When we talk about trauma being stored in the body, we're also talking about chronic pain. We're talking about illnesses. We're talking about chronic fatigue. We're talking about stress responses. We're talking about how a person's brain and the hormones and all this change after traumatic experiences. Now, something I learned about before coming to grad school was this thing called the top-down approach and the bottom-up approach to therapy. Top-down being we have thoughts and feelings, we're going to deal with the thoughts and feelings, and then our physical experience of the world will find its way to harmony. When we talk about bottom-up, this is a very somatic approach. It's really dealing with our body first and trusting that as we heal what's in the body and as what's coming up in our physical reality, what's happening in our thoughts and feelings will be easier to manage and easier to heal. And in fact, sometimes just dealing with what's in the body is the healing. This is obviously a very holistic approach. So things like yoga are often incorporated. EMDR is part of somatic therapy. And while I didn't find a ton of resources talking about it in my personal experience, ecotherapy is absolutely somatic therapy as well. So in 2013, I experienced capital T life-altering trauma, and there was a very physical component to it. For about 3 years after that, I was in complete denial. I think like cognitively, emotionally, I knew something happened, but it was beyond anything I could process. The only times I could really acknowledge that was when I had flashbacks. Even when I had panic attacks, it didn't really make sense to me. And it wasn't until late 2015 when my panic attacks became daily, when I was sleeping less than 3 hours a day, when I was losing a bunch of weight, when I couldn't keep food in my stomach, when I just was constantly hypervigilant, though I didn't know that word at the time, but I was physically on edge so much that in the course of less than a year, I had kidney stones, I had fainting spells, and I ended up in the hospital 3 different times. It was very clear to me my body was trying to send me a message. And it took my body getting to these extreme negative experiences to help me acknowledge in my mind and in my heart that healing needed to happen. When I did start therapy, it was a top-down approach, right? We were talking about feelings, about this difficult experience, and my therapists would integrate like what's happening in your body. There was some somatic work, but my real healing happened when I combined talk therapy with ecotherapy, and that was all self-guided. But I found that by getting myself to the gym, by going for a hike, by doing things that had nothing to do with my trauma or healing, but everything to do with noticing the sensations in my body, intentionally controlling what was happening in my body, it gave me confidence and a sense of empowerment that helped me begin to regulate my nervous system. And because I had that physical power, that physical awareness, then I was able to start talking about my trauma. And I really credit particularly wilderness immersion to why I am functional today and why I was able to move through such overwhelming symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Which leads me to the strengths. As you can imagine, I think there are a lot of strengths to this approach. Now, aside from it being a very accessible therapeutic approach, you don't need medication. You don't need a highly, specialized environment. This is something that literally just uses your ability to breathe, your ability to see, to smell, to touch, to hear. Even if somebody is lacking some of those, they have access to at least one. If you can control your breath, you can do somatic therapy. It really speaks to our primal ability to heal, which I'll speak to in a second when I talk about the cultural background of this. So other strengths include that it gets us in our bodies, which in our modern culture is incredibly unusual because we have sedentary lifestyles. We're very much in like a thought information kind of ecosystem. We don't value the physical as much outside of like some objectification things, which we're not going to get into in this video. But it helps us be in our bodies and therefore self-regulate and be more self-aware. When practicing somatic therapy, we're going to be quicker to recognize when something is triggering our fight or flight response and then move away from it. We will also be more able to recognize that recognize that fight or flight response and then regulate it. These are very simple tools. Box breathing, naming everything in the room that's green, very simple things that engage our senses. To me, that is a huge, huge win. Now, another strength that leads into a limitation is just the ancestral use of somatic therapy. Well, this is a new thing in modern mental health. The truth is our ancestors have been singing and dancing out their trauma since the dawn of time. We have been feeling physically our way through healing for as long as we have been human, which is one of the cons. I really don't think we are recognizing that in modern conversations around somatic therapy, and I think that's incredibly important. Another con is that there's really not that much evidence just yet. There's a fantastic book called The Body Keeps the Score by Wessel van der Kopf. I believe I'm saying that right. And there's a bunch of data there. It's a really well done book with a lot of references to the validity of somatic therapy. But when you compare it to more traditional approaches to therapy, we're still at the very beginning of showing how effective this is. Because this is such an accessible modality, pretty much anybody can integrate it, but that doesn't mean everybody is well trained. When we think about a person's cultural background, there's a huge range of how embodied a culture is, how safe it is to be in your body, how it's seen as positive or negative to even think about your body in certain ways. So when a therapist is employing this approach, it's really important to understand the cultural background, the person's relationship to their body, and what that means, especially around gender, and especially around this potentially being re-triggering, which is probably the biggest con for me, is that if you're not properly trained in this, you could bring someone to a triggering memory and not take them back out of it and bring them back to being grounded in their body in the present moment, which would be more harmful than helpful. There are so many ways I would use this in pretty much every therapeutic setting, whether it's a breathing exercise, using smell to become present, using touch or movement to express what's happening. I personally love the idea and have experienced taking people out into the wilderness and grounding them in a neutral state and teaching them what we call owl eyes in survival, which is wide angle vision, full sensory awareness, and using that as a neutral place. And then moving into what we call counsel, which is essentially group therapy around a fire, and allowing those more painful memories to come up and using our neutral owl eyes body as a reference of comparison, of saying, okay, then I felt grounded in my feet. I could hear everything. I wasn't overstimulated. Now I feel my breathing is shallow. Now I feel worried people are looking at me and it makes my body small. There's so many different ways to use this. I could talk about this for 30 more minutes, but there's a 10-minute limit on this video. So I hope you appreciated my summary of somatic therapy.